mankind has never been alone. From the beginning, he's lived within the long shadow of one threat after another. So mankind creates a tool and defeats the threat, and new threats emerge. And so it goes. From the Stone Age to the Bronze Age,
The final answer will be determined
to the Information Age. Today, the long shadow of threats extends further than ever. What blocked last year's malware won't stop this year's ransomware. A new tool is required, a completely new approach to endpoint security. That tool is here.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited to be here to introduce a brand new product from Sophos called Sophos Intercept X. This is a brand new, born next generation, signatureless endpoint protection product that we're very, very excited to bring to market. But first, let me walk you through why we thought we needed to bring something like this to market and what are the problems being faced by many organizations. First of all, the landscape has changed a little bit, and we're really looking at attacks now that are coming from within the perimeter, and they're focusing on exploiting vulnerabilities in legitimate software. We've seen this most effectively in ransomware, which has just ravaged the industry and has become a multi-billion-dollar business for the malicious actors. And then coupling all that with the fact that we have a real lack of threat intelligence after a breach. Either the tools are too complex, or the sophistication necessary to run those tools just doesn't exist in certain organizations. And we're dealing with this every day because we're dealing with a world that has advanced malware, and the malware just gets smarter and smarter and more sophisticated as each day passes. And one of the approaches they're taking now is taking advantage of vulnerabilities by exploiting them using zero-day techniques. And again, lastly, having limited visibility into these problems becomes hugely problematic for organizations. They don't have a full understanding of what the scope of an attack was. And so to be able to look at where we are, we have to look at where we've been. And so when we look back at kind of Sophos and what we've done in the traditional malware space, we've introduced many next-generation techniques to the traditional malware set. So for example, we use pre-execution analytics to pull out expected behaviors from a process and determine through those behavioral analytics if this is a malicious process or not. We look at crowdsourced download reputation, and of course we look at other things like URL blocking and some other core rules. But we now take approaches towards advanced threats as well. We look at processes that are actually running and observing the actual behaviors of the process in a signatureless manner to be able to do analytics against it and understand if the process is malicious or not. And then we also now are deploying a new way of looking at how techniques are used to exploit vulnerabilities and usually trusted good processes like Office documents and Adobe files. And so when we think about what's necessary across a spectrum of protection, we look at what we internally call the nasty nine. These are a bunch of different attack vectors that generally attackers and malware go after. And in order to really provide broad protection, you have to have solutions in each of these categories. And why has this changed? Well, what we've seen is really a change in the way these attacks go down. 90% of all data breaches are from exploit kits. These are attacks against legitimate applications by exploiting vulnerabilities. And more so, 90% of those attacks are done against known vulnerabilities. So these are published vulnerabilities within products. And what makes this stat even more concerning is the fact that there's a typical window of about 193 days between when a vulnerability is published and when it's finally patched. And that is a combination of the patch being made available by the vendor and the customer deploying that patch. That is a huge window of opportunity for a malicious actor to take advantage of a vulnerability in a product. And then to make matters worse, when there is an attack, even if it's a detected attack, the ability to fully understand what has happened doesn't exist, because more than 60% of IT staff today lack the incident response skills necessary. And then on top of that, those who have some of those skills are forced to use massively complicated products in order to have the insight to what they need. So when we look at this landscape, we look at the need to bring next generation technologies and capabilities to market. And we hear often the term next generation endpoint. And one of the things that's somewhat frustrating to many people is there's no set definition of what a next generation endpoint is. We have our own view of that, and we think that it means that you have to have broad coverage across all of these nasty 9 and more, and you have to use next generation techniques in that coverage itself. So first, let's look at prevention. I have to be able to prevent bad things from happening on my machine. I want to be able to block things before it ever even hits my endpoint. And that if it is on my endpoint, I want to be able to run some analytics against it before I allow it to run. Therefore, I can block something bad before we ever even see it operating. But we know prevention is not perfect in any security technology, so we want to be able to detect when something bad has happened. I want to detect when a piece of malicious code is actually running, and I want to be able to detect it as quickly as possible so I can limit the damage. I want to be able to understand if I have a legitimate process that's being exploited through an attack vector and be able to block that. And of course, I want to be able to catch ransomware as quickly as possible so I can reverse that and limit the damage. And of course, once I detect something, the next stage is I have to be able to respond to it. By responding to it, I need to be able to clean every remnant of that attack from that system by doing a very deep advanced clean on it. And then of course, I have to have visibility and understanding exactly what happened in that incident and be able to get a broad understanding and see very clearly what occurred in that attack. To us, this is what a next generation endpoint detection and response product is. It's not one magic solution to cover one sliver of this. It's the ability to have next generation techniques across the entire spectrum. And so with that, we are introducing today Sophos Intercept X. It's a completely new approach to endpoint security, a born next generation signatureless product from Sophos. And we're focusing Sophos Intercept X on these 3 areas. In the space of advanced malware, we have some very specific technology against ransomware. And of course, ransomware is another form of malware, but it's a very unique form that does some very specific things. Namely, it uses encryption to take advantage of controlling files on a user's device and holding that control ransom. And so what we've done with our anti-ransomware technology is when we identify a process that's trying to encrypt files, we start to do behavioral analytics against that process. And while we're doing that analysis, we actually store copies of the files that they're attempting to encrypt in their pre-encrypted form in a safe zone obfuscated from the rest of the system. And usually between 2 to 6 encryption events, we can determine if this process is legitimate or not. So if it is legitimate, such as Sophos safeguard encryption, we'll let it continue to encrypt. If we determine through behavioral analytics that it is a malicious process, we will block that process, we will do advanced cleaning to clean that process, and we'll actually pull those pre-encrypted files out of the safe store and return them back to the original locations, therefore rolling back any of the encryption done by the ransomware. So not only is the ransomware blocked, but you get complete rollback of any changes that ransomware had done. Onto our anti-exploit technology. Here we have a completely signatureless approach. We focus on hacker and malware techniques of exploiting legitimate applications. And there's about 24 different techniques we've identified that are used in any type of exploit attack. These are things like heap sprays or stack pivots or ROP calls. And we see an introduction of 1 to 2 of these new techniques every year. For example, my team identified a new technique not too long ago where ransomware vendors started writing ransomware that altered the pre-boot environment, so the next time the machine booted, it would actually start the encryption process even before the operating system started. So any technology you had running in the operating system to block the ransomware wouldn't even be executing because the operating system wasn't booted yet. So that was a new technique that we built a protection for example, in that case, to monitor any changes to the pre-boot environment, do an analysis of that request, and if it's malicious, to block it from happening. So now that we have this anti-ransomware and anti-exploit, we're going to catch things as they're happening, and we want to be able to have visibility into that. So with that, we've launched an automated incident response solution that we call root cause analysis. This uses security analytics to understand the full extent of an attack and be able to present that information in a way that even a novice can understand, in a very simple what happened, how did it happen, where did it happen, and who did it happen to, all the way to the advanced incident response analyst who can look at a visualization of the attack and be able to do deep investigative forensics against that. In addition to that, we've introduced Sophos Clean into this, which is a deep advanced cleaning product that will go out and clean all the remnants of an attack. And this is an important aspect because even sometimes when the malware itself is removed, there's little remnants that are left behind that follow-on attackers can cobble together to use to their advantage. So we want to make sure anything that is detected gets completely and deeply cleaned off the system. So this is a very exciting day for us, and you'll see, hopefully see it even more exciting when I turn it over to Russ, who's going to walk you through an amazing demo of Sophos Intercept.
Thank you, Dan. Well, you can see my desktop, and on my desktop I've got my mail client with an urgent email from Dan. I'll come back to that in a moment. I have a folder in which I've got a number of files that I'm working on, including some very important ones. And here I have the new user interface for Intercept X, so you can see things as they unfold. So back to that email. Well, I've got an email apparently from Dan. It's marked urgent. There's urgent in the text. I can see it's from Dan because there's a picture of Dan, and he's asking for me to immediately have a look at the latest widget pricing. Well, this is a social engineering attack, and this document contains a ransomware payload, a variant of HydroCrypt, actually. But let's pretend for a second I fall for this exercise. Word opens the document as it's instructed, and here we can see the widget sales predictions. Now, Word is smart. It puts this document in a kind of document sandbox because it sees that the document contains macros. But the bad guys are smart too, and this particular ransomware attack is going to try to convince me that to get the very latest widget pricings, I need to enable editing. And I'm going to do that because I want to give Dan the best data possible. Of course, what's actually going to happen is it's going to attempt a ransomware attack on all the documents on my machine. Fortunately for me, I'm protected by Intercept X CryptoGuard. Here you can see a piece of toast has popped up to let the user know that the ransomware was blocked. We can see the malicious behavior has been detected, the threat has been detected, and I as a user have been prompted that perhaps I should get in contact with my IT administrator. Naturally, of course, under normal circumstances, this user interface is hidden in a bar here. This dialog box is simply the bad guys trying to keep me busy whilst the attack took place. But what's most interesting is look what happened over here in the documents. You can see that some of these documents have been encrypted by HydroCrypt. It stops here though, because that's when CryptoGuard detected the malicious behavior, and it is a behavior-based detection, and stopped the process from being able to continue. In short, the ransomware attack could go no further. On top of that, automatically, CryptoGuard undid the attack, in essence, rolling back the contents of the encrypted document back to their original state. This is what this document looks like if I didn't have CryptoGuard running as a part of Intercept X. Frankly, everything's been encrypted, and if all my documents look like this, I'm probably going to be forced to pay the bitcoins. However, CryptoGuard caught the attack and rolled back the first couple of files that were touched in the early part of the attack back to their original state. So none of my data is lost. Well, that's very good, but let's take a look at what an administrator would see. Here I've logged into the Sophos Central dashboard. I can see an alert that represents the attack we just saw demonstrated on the endpoint. If I click on that, I can see that Intercept X has correctly reported to Sophos Central that CryptoGuard was detected, and that's a ransomware attack. Now, if one didn't have root cause analysis, that might be all the information that you got. And all it tells me is that I was kept safe from a ransomware attack, but not the root cause. Well, this is what root cause analysis provides us. If I click on root cause analysis, here is the attack that just took place a few minutes ago. If I click on this attack, root cause analysis, I see a high-level view of the attack. What was the type of attack? Were any business files involved? On what machine and what user did it take place? When? And, very briefly, what's the root cause? And notice it's not the beacon application. It is not the application that was convicted. Let's look at that attack in a visual format. So here is a visualization of the attack as it took place, from when it was caught, the beacon event, which is in this program called tester2.exe, all the way back to the root cause, which, if you remember the demonstration, was indeed my mail client or Outlook. So obviously an administrator would know, without root cause analysis, the steps that Russ had taken to get to the point where his machine was about to be attacked, and indeed an attack attempt occurred for ransomware. Well, now you can see this. Here I can see the Outlook, an email client obviously. Russell obviously attempted to look at this document called latest widget pricing. That was written to a temporary directory by Outlook, so I now know that I double-clicked on it in the mail. That opened Word, because that's the appropriate application for that document. And Word just so happened to write a temporary file, which was opened by another instance of Word, which is in essence in the sandbox. But, as you know, Russ clicked Enable Edit, so he came out of the sandbox, and the macro ran, reaching out to a website that is in this list, and here are a list of the websites that were communicated to you during the attack. And none of those are known bad, otherwise our malicious traffic detection capability would have caught it. But let's pretend that one of those in this demonstration was an unknown website that hosted the second part of this attack, which is this application that was downloaded and executed. That application was executed, and it actually ran through the console host and ran another instance of itself. That application was the application that was going to actually attempt to do the ransomware attack. And that was the application that started to read these files, and here are the rich text files in the documents folder that I was working on. And then as it attempted to write those, in other words, encrypt those files, our CryptoGuard capability caught it and convicted it. So here you can see the whole threat chain, from conviction all the way through to root cause, and all of the activities that happened by all of the actors between these two events, from the identified root cause through to the beacon event. As you can see, that gives us a lot of information. I know as an administrator, for example, that Russell still has this mail in his inbox, most likely. I probably want to have a look to see if this document exists anywhere. I could double check to see if any of these IP addresses are familiar ones, and I can do that either here, interactively in the visualize presentation of a root cause analysis, or I can very easily pop over to the artifact screen, which lists all of the artifacts in the threat chain. Quickly click on network connections, and here I can see any network connection made by any process in that chain from start to finish. This would allow me perhaps to identify any lateral movement attempts or any high value asset attacks that may have occurred. Didn't happen in this particular demonstration, but a very easy way for someone to have a quick look to see if perhaps anything else may have been involved in the overall attack. And remember, we've distilled this down to a simple high-level view.
Thanks, Russ, and hopefully you guys all thought that was exciting as we do. And so I want to go back and just quickly summarize what you've seen. You've seen a brand new and unique approach to anti-ransomware, using behavioral analytics to convict a process, but rolling back any changes that ransomware made to bring the endpoint back to a good, clean state with their pre-encrypted content. We saw how it uses that the ability to block hacker techniques and prevent exploits from occurring. And then lastly, you saw a deep understanding of the various scales and scopes that we have around presenting the root cause to an administrator, from the summary screen all the way to the graphical representation of the attack and anywhere in between. So today we're bringing forth a new solution called Sophos Intercept X, and what's really exciting about that is you can run this in two different ways. You can run Sophos Intercept X as a standalone product alongside any other endpoint solution, or of course you can run Sophos Intercept X with our solution, Sophos Central Endpoint. And the beautiful thing is when you run it with Sophos Central Endpoint, the two products merge into one consolidated agent. So you only have one agent to manage, one set of policies to create, one reporting infrastructure. It's a beautiful thing, and we've done this by re-architecting our agent to take advantage of new innovations, rapid innovations, and rapid innovative changes to existing components of the agent. We're very excited about what we've brought together here for you today, and we are looking forward to everybody using Sophos Intercept X and being safer in this crazy new world we live in. Thank you very much.